Hi, I'm Ricc Rollins, and this is Goin Places, and we want you to come along. Let's go. It's Women's History Month, but I like telling her story. And I thought when I was thinking of all the people I would want to talk to, Sheryl Cassaeux is one of those people. Why? Because she has not only made a name for herself in this community, but she makes sure that the community's name is known all throughout the country. Won't you help me welcome Sheryl Cassaeux to the show? Talk show host, podcast moderator, editor, mama, wife, preacher, teacher, my sister friend. Again, I'm so glad you're with us this morning.
Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be here. We were at a point in our entrepreneurship journey where we saw each other every
day.
single
Yes.
day.
Yes.
And I totally missed that.
I miss you too. I mean, you'd come by and bring people by. Sheryl was telling me, you can't come in here and not buy something. Buy a sock, buy some socks, buy something, but buy something. That's just the kind of woman she is. And I appreciate that. That's the kind of sister friend she is. I hear that thing. There's that.
That is true.
That promo.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we all have a story.
Yes, we do.
So Women's History Month is the perfect time to showcase and highlight what so many women are doing in the community today, in our country today. It's just a blessing to be here and sharing with you, Ricc.
So I appreciate that. So let's start here. I always like starting here. When Sheryl was a young girl, did Sheryl realize that she was going to have this kind of impact on her community? Was that always your dream? Were you a leader? Were you the person who always said, yes, we can?
I believe a lot of that is true. Listening to my mother talk to me and about me in later years, she would always say, well, Sheryl, I just didn't understand. You were such an inquisitive child. You always wanted to go places, do things, always bringing someone home, always involved in projects at school. She was always having to find money to help fund my project.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was my mother, and there were 8 of us, and so we each had to find that little niche. And
now, where were you in the 8, Sheryl? I didn't mean to cut you.
I was right smack in the middle.
Okay.
4 girls and 4 boys.
Mm-hmm. So you had to make sure your voice was heard.
I don't know if it was so much a voice, but maybe at the time it was, and I just didn't know it. But I certainly kept her busy.
But I think, and I can see that in you, that you have always been a go-getter. I mean, even before I knew who you were, I knew.
Oh my goodness,
I knew you. And then as we got closer, when I became a part of the 5508 Collaborist, it was then to see, I understood you even the more. And that's why I think we were akin to each other so much. So
interwoven.
Yes, exactly. So when you get to this place, as you are growing and you are at this place of, I always say that this point of defining what you were going to do in life as a young child, what did you say to people when they said, Sheryl, what you want to be when you grow up?
Honestly, a couple of things were going on. Having lost my father at a very, very young age, I got to spend years with my grandparents. And so there, I'm in a 2-parent home with my grandparents, and my grandfather was already a church leader. And even when I was a young child growing up, and my grandmother was very active as well. And so being taken with them to all of the churches, to the choir unions convention, and my grandfather picked up early on that I loved to read, I loved reciting poetry, and he started just enrolling me in things and
nurturing that gift.
He nurtured that. You're absolutely right. Good choice of words. And my grandmother as well. And I ended up, really, my grandfather was the chairman of this. He was director of new members orientation. And my grandmother, in her role, the choir, I began to sing in the same choir that they did. And as a result of that, fast forward, I became director of new members orientation at my church for almost 2 decades.
Oh, wow.
And following in his footsteps. And so that leadership component, I had such great role models. My mother was definitely taking care of all of my siblings.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother also had a penchant for supporting and fundraising, and she would say, and you probably remember this. There were little tea books,
Yes. Oh
and
my
so the
God, do I
churches.
remember those? My
Oh
dad
my
used to
God,
say,
yeah.
one more. My dad used to say, one more of them tea books come in my house, we're gonna have a problem because my mother,
Well, just
my
the
aunt were
for
involved.
me, it was just the opposite. It was my grandmother. And so she would share, like the social societies, and they would
Mm-hmm.
always have these teas. And, and then so I always had to dress up and become a
Mm-hmm.
part of that. And I would take the tea books and I would go in the community and raise money for her.
Mm-hmm.
Never gave it a thought, but I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look back to today, when you talk about, I was looking for, what do you call, people say, well, who are you? And the title came to me one day, and it was community philanthropist, because I give of my time, my talent, and my
Yeah,
treasure. It's just,
that's
and you
you.
know this,
That is
you
you.
served on committees with me.
Yes.
And I would say that came from my grandmother, the late Marnie Brooks.
Mm-hmm.
And she nurtured that in me, even though I didn't realize it at the time. But the more I am involved in community engagements, I see it. In fund development, I see it. And
Mm-hmm.
then when I became a teenager, my uncles owned a grocery store, and I would get off of my bus at school, go to the community store on the corner of East Lake Avenue, East Tampa,
Mm-hmm.
and 22nd Street.
Yeah.
And I was I was a fast learner, and they allowed me to run their cash registers, and there were two large cash registers. And I'm telling you, I took over the books, I took
Oh,
over the store.
wow.
I took over the store, and I've always been that take charge kind of a
Yes, you have.
person. It's,
That's one of the things I love about you, sis. Is we can give you a task, and we know it's going to be completed to the fullest of its ability. It's always let Sheryl do it. Somebody say, well, who should we
and
let
and
Sheryl do
and and
it?
Cheryl goes to God and asks for the
Yep,
plan.
yep, yep,
And
all the
and
time.
once he gives me that vision, it's over.
Okay.
It's
So,
it's over.
so this helped you develop that entrepreneurial spirit because you saw entrepreneurs in action on a daily basis. So,
I did.
where'd you graduate from high school?
Chamberlain High School.
Chamberlain High School. Well, now what do they call the Storm? Right? It's the Chamberlain
Well, I mean, they were the Chamberlain Chiefs,
Chamberlain
and I
Chiefs.
think
Yeah,
that
yeah,
changed a
yeah.
couple of years ago
Yeah.
as a result of,
So
yeah.
with you, you're graduating, and now it's time for you to decide what's next. How do you get to that place where you know this is what I'm doing next?
Well, back to your original question, I was just kind of sharing with you how I fell into
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
community fund development
Mm-hmm.
role, but my heart was always in the medical field.
Oh,
I wanted
really?
to be a
Okay.
nurse first,
Okay.
and from there, my desire was to go on to medical school. While I was living with my grandparents, my grandmother became ill, my great
Mm-hmm.
grandmother, and so I got to be the little nurse in the house. I loved taking care of her. When I went on to become a candy stripe, and I pursued that, and so when I went to school, my undergraduate was in nursing,
Okay.
and that's kind of like where that started.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, I went ahead and doing my internship. I was blessed with child, and so I ended up stopping school
Mm-hmm.
and went on and decided to raise a family. But my children were such encouragers, and especially my son Rocky, he wanted me to go back to school
Mm-hmm.
and finish that. And so I did. When my youngest went to high school, I decided it was time for me to go back and finish what I started.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've always enjoyed the medical field, always wanted to work in the medical field. And so during that period, I decided that I would work while I went to school, and started working for a medical practice. And then from there, a hospital. And
Mm-hmm.
then from there, I just stayed in the medical field. And with the leadership abilities that I was blessed with, I ended up taking over one department, then two departments, and three departments, and then four departments. And from there I became, the manager, the director. And so I've spent a lot of my years becoming the first of
Okay.
a lot, even from high school, because we were bused to Chamberlain, and
Mm-hmm.
so it was a lot of firsts. So to answer your question, it started with the medical field, and then from there, I just have a love of helping others and organizations And that's where that community philanthropic goal comes from. But they were both inside of me.
Okay. We're telling her story today. And the story that we're telling is Sheryl Cassaeux's. When we left, Sheryl was talking about how she had such a penchant for the medical field. And that love led, combined with leadership, made her really a force to be reckoned with. So let's pick up there, Sheryl. So now you're leading four and five and six and seven
pick up
departments.
there.
Okay.
Well, Sheryl wouldn't be Sheryl without her amazing parents. Both my parents are no longer here. My father, James Andrew Jennings Sr., they were both Middletonians, and my mother, Mrs. Frances Brooks Jennings, fell in love at Middleton High School, and that's where they both graduated from. And my father was a leader as well. My mother was a little more soft-spoken, but a lot of that leadership abilities came from my father. But he died when I was just 12 years old. And so having to go, spending some time with my grandparents and having such a strong grandfather in Virgil Brooks, very, very active in the church, I just followed that path.
Yes, you
all
did.
the way up beyond adulthood. And so certainly wanted to shout out to them. And then I was just blessed to have some amazing siblings. And that's kind of like how it all got started. We were in the community, just always helping and supporting others. And someone asked me the other day, and I know you're going to talk about the American Heart Association, but that giving component has always been a part of me. And they reminded me that I walked for the March of Dimes. And I think I was the only Black in my school that joined this large group. I walked 21 miles for the March of Dimes, and I was raising money at the age of 17.
And
so there you have it.
You've always raised money. But before we get to raising money, let's talk about raising kids. You've got amazing young people that are now adults. You talked about Rocky earlier. Rocky is a comedian. He's an actor. He's a designer.
Entrepreneur.
He's an entrepreneur. Let's talk about your kids for a moment.
I have five. We're blessed to have five beautiful children. When I married my husband, Alan Cassaeux, Reverend Alan Cassaeux Sr. today, he had two beautiful daughters, Urisa and Shermie, and they became my daughters. So we have this beautiful blended family. And then Alan and I were blessed to have three children together. Rocky, which is Alan Jr., he's the oldest of the three. He lives out in LA. You're right. He's a comedian. He's an entrepreneur. He has a beautiful wife, Mimi. They both love to dance. I think that's probably how they met. And then our youngest son is Yannick. He has moved here. He actually moved here a couple of years ago when my husband became ill. And then the baby girl, who's always been here, she entrepreneur. They're all entrepreneurs.
Yes, they are.
Even when they were in college, they were. The term would be they always had a hustle.
Well, they get it from the parents. I mean, come on now.
Yeah. And so my daughter lives in North Dakota with her amazing husband, Daryl, and they run multiple businesses, even so many miles away. So we've really been blessed. Our children grew up in the church, and as a result of that, they were great orators. They won all types of contests. And both my boys were introduced to society, another fundraising piece.
Because they were Sir Debonaires, right?
Yes, they were, both of them. Rocky was Sir Debonair twice.
Okay, yes, he was. I didn't win, but I was one of the first Sir Debonairs with Zeta Phi Beta.
Yes, Zeta Phi Beta, absolutely.
Yeah.
Rocky was Junior Sir Debonair, won by landslide, and then his senior year he was Sir Debonair, and of course won by. And so then the youngest one came up wanting to do the same thing. And so he did. So we've just been so blessed to have five incredible children, and we have five grandchildren.
Oh, wow. Okay. See, you're a grandma. You're nobody's grandma.
I'm grandma. Yes, I am.
So you mentioned, and we see the Go Red, and we're talking about the American Heart Association.
Yes.
Let's talk about why this is so near and dear to you.
Oh, wow. That's a hard one. I mean, it's not a hard one. Again, thinking back to, and I was reminded.
No, it's not a hard one, but it is a heart one.
It's a heart one. Oh, you're good. You're good. It's a heart one.
Okay.
And it really goes back. I share it with your audience, your television audience, my grandparents, Virgil and Monty Brooks. Well, both my grandparents suffered from cardiovascular disease. And we didn't know much about it at the time. I was in nursing when my grandmother had her stroke, and I would leave school and go and sit with my grandfather and sit there with my grandmother. And that's when he began to tell me about, where he wanted, what he wanted, how he wanted to help me support my education. But I was there, and I remember the doctors would allow me to come in and help and take care or the whole team take care of my grandmother all the way down to, when she was just in almost a vegetative state. And I was allowed to be in there for the entire time. So fast forward, then my grandmother, both maternal, paternal, both had cardiovascular disease. So they both died from heart attacks and strokes. And 17 years ago, Rick, I decided to run a marathon in honor of them. But let me tell you why I ran that marathon. I'll never forget. And I tell Jolie Cooper Nelson to this day. She was at our church. She was a member of our church, and she had attended with one of the Buccaneers, and they were looking for volunteers. Couldn't find any. We had invited them to one of our meetings. I was like, no one? And I thought, well, wait, you want people to run a marathon? How far is a marathon? When she said 26.2 miles, I knew it was far, just couldn't remember the numbers. And I thought, well, shoot, I see why. But that night, that's all I thought about. You can make a difference. Why don't you check into it further? And I did. I ran 26.2 miles, raised a ton of money with the Florida team for the American Heart and American Stroke Association. But little did I know, and the individuals that nominated me had no idea about my involvement from all of those years. So fast forward, because I know time is short.
My husband. What we're gonna do? Let me say this: even after this segment, we're gonna add a segment for next week's show because we need to do the Go Red campaign justice. But I want them to hear this, so they'll come back next week. Keep going.
Well, as you know, how important cardiovascular is, and so then my husband ends up having an aortic aneurysm with. He also had a heart attack. He has atrial fibrillation. And when they reached out to me about it, and I thought, I don't know if I have the time. I'm my husband's primary caregiver. And then after prayerful consideration, I realized that I could be his voice. I understand the importance of how cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer for women. And imagine what that is for African-American women.
Yes. Yes.
And that was the deciding factor for me. I could be that voice. I could use my influence to certainly help them. And we have just been blessed throughout this campaign. There are activities coming up. We're having Heart and Soul Sunday, as you already know. We're in your place. We're in other businesses. I'm excited to have been selected as one of the nominees. There are 4. I was the first woman of color, and I'm happy to report that they now have 2. So our tagline is representation matters.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Sheryl, what I want to do is we're going to continue this conversation. So you got to come back next week because Sheryl is going to explain in detail how you can make a difference and how you can help her make that difference. And I want you to do that because that's my sister. We'll be back right after this. Sheryl could have sat back and said, woe is me. But instead, being the woman that I know her to be, and that's why her story is worth telling, she decided she was going to make a difference. Let's pick it up from here, Sheryl.
It's a simple process with the American Heart Association. The theme is be the beat. Be the beat for the woman you love. Be the beat for the women in your life. Be the beat for the person in your life. And that's what we're doing. We are being the beat. How do we be the beat? In my role as the Woman of Impact nominee, it's all about advocacy. It's about education. And then there's the third arm, which is about raising funds, raising much needed funds where the American Heart Association gets to use for pertinent research. And many people don't realize this and the work that the American Heart Association does. But think about someone with CPR or learning CPR and the research that's associated with it. Think about someone in your family that may have a stent put in. One of the things before my husband had his heart attack was Diane Hart, State Representative Diane Hart. She actually called me, Rick, while she was in the emergency room getting ready. They were prepping her for surgery, actually, to tell me about her heart attack. And she walked me through every single episode of it. And 1 month to the day, is when it happened to my husband. I knew immediately
Wow.
what he was going through.
Wow.
And it was because of that and the quickness in making the decision to call the right people and get him where he needed to be is how that journey started. And so we're so thankful he's here. It's been quite a journey. It involves your whole entire family and your community, because heart disease is different for each person, each patient.
Yes, it is.
And that's important for us to know. So yeah, to have an opportunity to be a woman of impact, to use that distinction to help raise funds for the American Heart Association, I'm in 100%.
Okay.
And so I get to go out and share with companies like yours, with churches, with organizations, and say, will you be the beat for the woman in your life? Why, Rick? Because every 80 seconds, a woman has a heart attack.
Yeah. Yep.
Every 80 seconds.
80 seconds. Think about how many seconds have passed in this conversation. There's a woman having a heart attack somewhere.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so I want you to think about that. If you sit there for a moment, just think about it. 80 seconds, not even a minute and a half, but there's a woman having a heart attack or some kind of cardiac episode.
So that means we have an opportunity now to make sure that the funds are there so that more research is being done for women. And that's my role.
So how are we going to help them, Sheryl? The QR code is coming up right now.
Okay. And there's a QR code, and you can see it on my screen. You are using the QR code for the customers that's coming into your shop, and some of the other stores in our local community, they're doing the same thing. If an individual is watching this show, and even if they catch the replay up until April the 6th, they can scan that QR code. It will take them straight to my webpage, and they can read my story in detail. But not just my story. I have a whole team of ambassadors. It's the Alan and Sheryl Cassaeux Heart Health Ambassadors team. And you can meet the team members. You can hear them talk about their personal experiences with cardiovascular disease. That's a heart attack and stroke. Ricc Rollins, I was there with you when you experienced your first episode with cardiovascular disease. And so what do? Scan the QR code. You know, I could go on with a lot of fluff. We just need you to write a check.
That's it.
Make a donation. You get to select the amount. But there are all different types of levels that they can use for different distinctions. Scan the QR code, decide to make a donation. If their smartphones are handy, you can text TB for Tampa Bay, TB Sheryl, SHERRYL, to 71777. It's just that simple.
It's that simple.
It's that simple.
Like Sheryl says, any amount.
Any amount.
It will help. Don't think that your dollar can't help, because dollars add up.
Dollars can't help, but we do love contributions, donations with a comma.
Yeah. That's my friend. That's my friend. So in the time that we have left, Sheryl, I want you to tell them one more time what they need to do to make sure that that beat is strong and loud. Go ahead.
There's so many reasons you can decide why you want to be the beat. Just this past Sunday, our pastor, Reverend Larry R. Roundtree II, said he wanted to be the beat for his wife so that they could live a long, healthy life together. How can you do that? Write a check to the American Heart Association, scan the QR code, go straight to our webpage, hear the story, or text TB Sheryl. Look at my name up there on my back, my logo, SHERRYL, to 71777.
There you go. It's that simple.
There you go. It's that simple. Thank you, Rick. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
I appreciate you.